I didn't grow up thinking I had much of an origin story. I grew up in a small town on the Ohio River, my old Kentucky home. Generations in quite literally one place. We had Civil War roots, Revolutionary roots, and a town that barely changed, for better or worse. That really felt like an origin story. Sounds like an origin story. But it wasn't, because the deeper I looked, the more I realized something. Our story didn't start there. It started here in England. And I didn't come back to that story on purpose. I just ended up here. And I only then did I start to understand something strange. I hadn't necessarily moved to a new country per se, but I had returned to the beginning of a circle that my family started 400 years ago. Now, when you grow up in one place where your family has lived for generations, it doesn't feel temporary at all. It feels very permanent. And my family quite literally has been in my hometown for generations. The land starts to feel familiar in a way that you just can't explain. And there's stories that everyone just knows in town. And you don't think of any of this as history, it's just normal. My hometown sets in that kind of continuity. People stayed, families layered, names repeated, and over time, graves filled. You can trace lines across decades, and really nothing moved. It gives you a sense of belonging, but it also, I feel like, creates an illusion. Because the more time you've always been in one place, you just you start to assume that's where everything started. Now, like our roots are what we would call deeply American. We have Civil War records. I have a Union corporal in my family who willingly enlisted, and I have photos of him on horseback. Like I said, that history feels incredibly foundational to your origin story. It makes you feel like you've come from the fabric of a country itself. And for most of my life, that's kind of where the history stopped. But the more I kept digging, the more the records go backwards, further back than America, and names that don't belong to Kentucky or Virginia or even the colonies, but names that belong to England. Not just passing references, but detailed movement and birth charts, marriage certificates, and land ties here. A line that crossed the Atlantic in the 1600s and then just stayed rooted in one place for centuries. But the deeper I looked, the more clear that pattern became. The American story I grew up with wasn't the beginning. I think you can best describe it as a chapter. And that chapter started, like all Americans, with migration. Not the romantic kind we imagine, but people simply crossing the ocean trying to survive, carrying everything they had forward and just staying, building towns, building taverns, raising families, and starting communities, becoming American, you could say. I think history often focuses on the famous, what you learn in school, the leaders, the generals, the names everyone knows. But most of the world was built by people that we don't even know. The farmers, the settlers, the builders, and the families. The kind of people that left England and arrived in the colonies and just simply stayed. They lived through revolutions, they lived through civil war, and then the creation of a new country. They became part of its foundation. And when you look through the documents and the photographs, I guess something shifts. It stops being a family history and it becomes a map of how an entire society was formed and you were part of it. And through those people in my family deciding to plant themselves somewhere and just stay generationally, that's how a town becomes a home. And That's how a country becomes an identity. Now, I didn't move to England because of ancestry. I didn't even think about it when I was packing up my boxes. It was a practical decision, a life decision. Work, relationships, and opportunity brought me here. And like most people who relocate to another country, I assumed I was living in one place and then starting in a new place that was completely new. No, fresh start. But the longer I've lived here, the stranger something felt. Things have begun to feel familiar. And not like the obvious kind of familiar, not because there's a KFC on every corner or because the language is the same-ish, I took out the yous and words, but the way the communities are formed, that part didn't feel foreign to me. It felt weirdly recognizable. And I really couldn't explain why it started to feel familiar. But then I started connecting all the timelines, England, migration, the colonies, the frontier, wars, settlements, generations, and now me, back to where the line began. And then my perspective started to change. I don't really feel like an outsider living abroad anymore, but I feel like a part of a longer movement, a continuation in my family. I feel like a circle has quietly closed, if that makes sense. I know most Americans have grown up believing their story starts mostly in America, and most Brits assume that Americans are incredibly detached from their history. But I think most people are missing something in that idea because I don't think the Atlantic separated identities, it just stretched them. And people who crossed it didn't stop being connected to where they came from. We carried the language, we carried the customs, we brought some of the beliefs for better or worse, but we built something new. And that foundation stayed similar in a lot of ways, I feel. It's deviated a lot in the past few decades, but I think for a long time it was more similar than not. And then I crossed that bridge I didn't know existed by returning. I don't think I left America, but I didn't come to England searching for my roots either. I just followed where life went. And sitting here now, looking back at everything, it really doesn't feel like moving countries. It feels more like stepping back into the first chapter of my family's story, and I was just kind of plopped down in the middle of it. And maybe that's what identity is. Maybe it's not where you start or where you live, but it's just a long thread of people and places and events and decisions that carry you, whether you're aware of it or not, to wherever you may be. And sometimes I think you only see that thread when you finally circle back to where it began. You know, I talked about my first relative that moved to the States after his father died in the Tower of London for not converting under Elizabeth Tudor from Catholic to Protestantism. And that's how detailed our records stayed, the Yates family. And it is surreal to live 25-minute tube ride to the very place where a relative of mine died, and that sparked his son's decision to completely relocate across the world. It's been amazing being here, and there's so much history I want to see, but there's also so much history tied into my family that I can't wait to see these places in person. So, thank you for watching me come through all of these realizations in life. And if you're enjoying it, please like and subscribe, do that little thumbs up, leave a comment. Are you from the UK? Are you from America? Do you have family and friends that have relocated? If so, how long ago? And this week I'm going up to York and I'm going to be doing some more walking tours and seeing the shambles and all these wonderful places you guys have suggested I have to see. So please let me know in the comments if there's more places I should stop and see. I have a long list. I got 3 days. I want to try to see as much as possible. But thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.